Good evening, everybody, and welcome to this evening session of Time of the Writer. It's great to have you all with us tonight. Before we begin, I'd just like to thank the sponsors and partners of the festival. Without their great support, we wouldn't be able to be here this evening. Special thanks to Hear My Voice, who are the technical partners and have done a wonderful job so far of getting us all connected despite our technological challenges. Obviously, the University of KwaZulu-Natal, the National Department of Arts and Culture, the KZN Department of Arts and Culture, the French Institute of South Africa, Stand Foundation, which has recently been founded to support the theatre and dance community in South Africa, the Foundation for Human Rights, the National Institute for the Humanities and Social Sciences, the Amazwi Museum for South African Literature, and the media partner for the festival is the Imbiza Journal. And I hope that you all take this opportunity to look up some of the wonderful articles that have been written about the festival, the panelists, and the many books that have been presented at Hear My Voice. It's not going to be a light meal tonight. We're jumping into a topic that I think is not just prevalent on the hearts of many South Africans at the moment, but at the moment is being spoken about worldwide. I'm joined by some amazing panelists, writers in their own right, and also editors of different collections. Xoliswa Nduneni-Ngema is the CEO of the Johannesburg City Theatres. She's had a lifelong career in the theatre and the entertainment industry, and she took the incredibly courageous and brave step of writing a book, Heart of a Strong Woman, which she told to Fred Khumalo, who's also with us, and he is the featured writer of the festival this year. In her book, Xoliswa narrated her experience of abuse and rape, and it's a very hard and very challenging read, and shows the underbelly of an entertainment industry in South Africa, which very often we only see what happens on the stage or on the screen, and we don't hear the stories of what happens off stage and behind the cameras. Jen Thorpe is a feminist writer. She's written 2 novels, but she's also edited 3 books. The first being My First Time Stories of Sex and Sexuality from Women Like You, Feminism Is, South Africans Speak Their Truth, and Living While Feminist. And she comes to this discussion with a particularly feminist lens to the topic of gender, power, and violence. Each of those subjects on their own would be difficult to tackle, but I think the three together make for a particularly toxic mix, and specifically in South Africa. In this past week, in fact, just yesterday, a man in Atlanta in America shot dead 8 people, 6 of whom were women. Last week, a woman in the UK was abducted and murdered by a policeman. There was a video circulated recently by one of the top boys' schools in Cape Town of a simulated rape between young boys. And when the director of the Independent Schools Association of South Africa was spoken to about this video of the rape circulating, he said, "No rape happened. The rape was simulated. It was 2 boys mocking around. Children will be children." The sheriff in America explained the shooting of 6 women by a man as he was pretty much fed up and kind of at the end of his rope, and yesterday was a really bad day for him, and this is what he did. So we're talking about this in an atmosphere where it's just a joke. It's just the way things are, and I think that it's become so normalized. So I'd like to ask you, Xoliswa, you particularly, since you've told your individual story, and Pumla in her book about Natama Brady in her book about femicide said, "What is important to take away from this is that individual stories matter a lot, because women die, they are not and should never be considered as just statistics, but also that these deaths and abuse don't happen in isolation. If we're ever really to make a meaningful difference to combating gender-based violence, we need to see and understand it for what it truly is." And I think your individual story speaks more powerfully than any numbers or statistics that we can roll out. So would you just share with us why you decided to take the brave step of telling your story?
Unmuted. Thank you, Tracy, and good evening to everyone. Hi, Fred. Hi, Jen. I understand Andy is not here, and hello to good evening to the viewers. My story is or was a difficult story to tell to Fred. I needed to heal first in order to understand what had happened to me over those years, months ago. What I did was really to say to myself, there's a need for me to take a step back. There's a need for me to look at what had happened to me. And if I wrote the book almost like 5 years after the divorce, it would have been a completely different book. I needed to heal. And 30 years later, sitting with Fred, narrating my story, going to the places where most of the stuff happened, it meant what one is not writing an angry book, co-writing an angry book, but it meant one is narrating a story. There's a need for us as women to tell our stories. And there's a need for us as a society, especially men, to come to terms as to what they do to us. Looking back, we navigated a difficult terrain. It was me, the girls had committed artists, including some of the men, the young men had committed artists. It was not an easy journey. So from where I'm sitting, it was important, or it is important, to tell our stories. Let me just pause there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Xoliswa. Fred, when Xoliswa was narrating her story to you, obviously you listened to it and you wrote it as a writer, but you're a man. And how was that experience, listening to what she narrated to you, and specifically that the abuse that she suffered was at the hands of a male partner?
Yes, Tracey, thanks for the question, and good evening to Xoliswa, fellow panelists and viewers at home. When Xoliswa first approached me with the view to helping her write this book, tell this story, I was in two minds. I was honored that she had thought of my name and had enough confidence in me to write or to tell her story. But a part of me was concerned that I'm a man, I'm a Black man, and she had suffered mostly at the hands of a fellow black man. Was I the right person to tell that story? Was I the right person to be trusted with those emotions, with those secrets? Because there are many secrets in the story. So in as much as I felt honored and privileged to have been consulted, to have been contacted in the first place, I had to sit down and think very hard about this whole thing and speak also to my wife what she thought of the whole idea of me being a man, sitting down with this woman who was hurting, who was still hurting even after 30 years. Would I be able to do justice to this story? Having thought about what she had to say, what my wife had to say, and what I had decided upon myself as a writer and as a man as well, I felt, let me take this as a challenge for me as a writer and as a man. Let me listen to the story. If at all I discover that a few listenings down the line, or a few consultations down the line, that I wasn't up to the challenge, maybe I could throw in the towel. We had already signed the contract, but it was an open-ended contract, which left me the right to say maybe I'm not up to the challenge. Well, as it happened, as we sat down and I listened to her story, and she took me to the places she worked at with Mbongeni and other members of committed artists, and she took me to Davidton, the township she grew up in, and she introduced me to her mother. I felt more confident that I really could be the vessel to the telling of this very harrowing story. So, and then I listened to the story, and I was by turns shocked, infuriated, and humbled by the depth of the pain that has been visited upon Xoliswa through the years, but also humbled by the courage, the resilience, and the fact that she had taken upon herself to say, enough is enough. Let me tell the story. It was a brave move by her to say, let me tell the story. It might embarrass myself in coming out. People might say, why did you keep quiet for so long? You are a disgrace to fellow women. Other people might say, why are you washing your laundry in public? So it was very courageous of her to come out and say, let's just tell the story. So yes, it was a long journey for her, especially, to document and say which part of the story needs to be told and which part would not be palatable and so on. So I sat down with her, and using my skills and experience as a writer and a journalist, there were things that we couldn't tell in the book because, they had major legal implications for Xoliswa, for Mbongeni, for other people involved in the narrative. So that is the nutshell of my engagement in the genesis to the telling of the story in book form.
Thank you very much, Fred. Jen, in your first collection of essays that you put together, My First Time, a lot of those recounts of women who were relating their first sexual encounter in South Africa, a lot of them were at the hands of violence. They were either victims of rape, either incest or familial abuse. Do you think that there's a feminist narrative which is different to a broader narrative around stories that women tell about the violence that is vested upon them?
I think every single story that a person decides to share is something that can encourage. So Fred was speaking a lot about courage, and I think he's absolutely right. And I think when you collect essays that share stories that are of the variety of sexual experiences, so from very negative and violent and disempowered to extremely enjoyable and pleasurable and sexually pleasing for women, what you do is shift a couple of narratives. First, you shift the narrative that women's sexuality is for someone else, that it's for the person who's having sex with them. And if we're assuming heterosexism, that you're assuming that the man is taking her virginity, she's lost her virginity. Obviously, in cases where there's sexual violence, that is a theft, it is a terrible experience. But I think in sharing those experiences, women take power back over their stories. So from a feminist perspective, I think any opportunity for us to hear women's truths, any opportunity for us to say, we believe you, we hear your story, and what you're saying isn't just a statistic, but statistics are important because they show that this is a structural problem, and this is a really common problem in South Africa and globally. Then we open up a door that busts myths, that prevents denialism, that encourages people to come forward and tell their stories.
Thank you for that, Jen. Fred, you spoke about Xoliswa's, people accusing her of coming forward with her story too late. And Xoliswa, a question for you. You said that it took you a number of years, in fact decades, to come to the point where you were ready to share your story. What happened in those intervening years? What were you hoping? Was there a time in those years in between where you had ever thought about writing your story? What made it this particular moment? Was there a particular event that gave you the courage to come forward and speak, or was it a series of events?
Thanks, Tracey, for the question. Over the 30 years, I really needed time to heal. And with healing, there's no time capsule. no one can indicate or can tell you when you are healed. And then what happened in 2018, I had the opportunity to sit with Fred and be able to work with him because I had the time. My contract ended at the city and I have 4 months to work with Fred. It took us a year to write the book, but at that time to do the research, sit with him over a 3-month period. So in 2018, that is what happened. So for me, what was key was to write the book. But I knew from the beginning, when I went into hiding, in 1987. No, let me leave the year, 1990. I went into hiding. When I was in hiding, I knew at that point in time, what was happening to me was really wrong. No one would move from a house and go into hiding into a flat in Hillbrow and be an owl, because I became an owl at that time. I could not move during the day because I was afraid Mogeni would find me and he would hurt me. Not just hurt me, he would kill me. So I was an owl. I knew at that time that I needed to write my story. And I had all my books, feminist books. I mean, one of the writers was Bushi Emacheta, the Nigerian writer. I was able to read and read and read. And I could tell that women were telling their stories. And I knew at that time that I will write the book. But whether it took me 5 years, it took me 10 years or 30 years, I knew the book had to be written. And I needed that time. And I knew I didn't want an angry book. If I wrote, like I said earlier, if I wrote the book 5 years after the divorce, it would have been a different book. Bri Hugh used to say, timing is everything. And when that happens, everything falls into place without you doing anything. So Fred fell into my lap. Long story, he fell into my lap, and the rest is history. So timing is everything. I waited 30 years, but an important story still. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing that with us. I think what's so powerful about your book and about your courage and your bravery in coming forward as well is that your abuser and the man who abused you and raped you is not some nameless, faceless person. It's somebody that most South Africans, in fact, a lot of international people know. So I think that, you know, it's almost a double step of courage to come forward with both your personal story and then to put into the limelight somebody who's been revered, whose work is applauded. And there's often a conversation around, you know, the topic of the talk is gender and power. When the power relationships, you know, when we look at either in marriages or in employee situations, do you think that, you know, there's still, we hear a lot of stories still about young women in the arts who feel threatened, who feel abused, and who feel silenced and are unable to come forward and to share their experiences and, you know, hide them away for fear of either the repercussions of not being asked to work in the industry again. Do you have any words for those women who are sitting in a similar position now when they listen to your story?
It is so unfortunate, Tracey, that the scales are still not balanced, especially in the arts. Men still hold the power. There is still couch casting. All I can say to the young women and young girls thinking of coming into the arts or training as people in the arts, whether they are actresses or any art, whether actresses, directors, or just going into just the creative side, or even behind the scenes in terms of technical, bring the skill, bring your ace game to the field. Don't rely on your gender. Really train as much as you can so that if somebody says no, you are able to move on and not rely on couch casting. And girls must be able to say no to that nonsense. It really has to stop at some point. It has to stop.
I mean, there does seem to be a particular problem with it I think all industries are affected, but in the entertainment industry in particular. And in an interview that you did recently when you spoke about You said statistics show that 60% of South Africa's boys themselves have been violated in some way or another. It's also not just rape, but the violence with which we as a society continue to live. It seems like society has accepted gender-based violence. We should have a zero tolerance of all violence, which brings me to, there's a case in the courts in Cape Town at the moment where a number of young boys have been allegedly raped and abused by a male musical director. So it's not just happening to girls, and it brings us back to the issue of power, that someone in the least powerful position, someone who wants a place in a school, who comes from maybe a background where they haven't had a stable home, or are just looking for love and attention, and that perpetrator can take advantage of that and take advantage of his position of power. Do you think that there is a particular problem in the entertainment industry itself, or do you think that it's widespread?
It is actually widespread. If you look at what is happening to the country during this period, especially last year, during lockdown level 4, 5, and level 4, 5, and 3, there were a lot of cases that were reported in terms of gender-based violence within the homes. So it's not just in the entertainment industry. The perpetrators live amongst us. They are with us at work. It's quite rife in the country, and we need more platforms like this one to actually talk about it. There's a need to break the silence, because there is a silent code in the arts industry without being it is a norm at this point in time. People do keep quiet because there's a benefit in the long run, but there is a need for us to really break the silence. It cannot go on as it is at the moment. But it is not just in the entertainment industry. It is widespread.
Thank you, Xoliswa. I mean, you touched on a very important point there, that there's a benefit to this violence and there's a benefit to the fear. And in her book, A South African Nightmare Rape, Nduneni-Ngema says, the female fear factory, which I also call the manufacture of female fear, relies on quick, effective transfer of meaning. To normalize depends on a combination of seemingly contradictory processes, frequent repetition of performance until the performance becomes invisible. In other words, when we see and hear something over and over again, we stop seeing and hearing it. It retreats to the background where, like static becoming white noise, we come to expect it. We come to expect it in a process of partial desensitization. Once this happens, its interruption becomes strange, dangerous, and often unthinkable. Jen, earlier when you were speaking about women telling their stories, you mentioned that although it's important to listen to individual stories, we can't lose sight of the fact that this is a systemic problem, that there's a system of patriarchy, there's a system of power imbalance, gender disparity that perpetuates the culture of violence and puts women into the insidious positions where they're often placed. Could you speak a little bit about how that system relates to women's everyday experiences, and what women and men can do on a daily basis to try and confront and try and upset that normality that we've become so desensitized to?
I think COVID has been a fantastic opportunity for us to have a look at the gender power relations in South Africa and around the world. If you have a look at our economic statistics, for instance, women are more likely than men to be unemployed. They're likely to earn around 74% of what their male counterparts earn for the same job. They are less able to take public transport. They are more reliant on social grants than men. So when we're talking about gender-based violence, we're talking about a spectrum of gender inequality that creates conditions where it makes it easy for men to exploit women, because women are in an economically disadvantaged position. So some of the things that we can do that workplaces don't really like, but that we should start demanding, are things like pay transparency. It might not seem obvious how this is connected to gender-based violence like we're talking about now, but if you have a look at salaries in your workplace and you start to see certain people are paid more, you can see why they start to wield more clout in an economic environment. We need to start talking about domestic labor and childcare. I think every parent will know that this has been such a tough time, but women in particular are more likely to live in a household as a single parent with a child than a single father is. So it's women who've picked up the domestic labor, the school labor when our schools were closed last year, and still some of them are closed now. So we need to start thinking about, what is our workplace policy around childcare? Do we have a creche at every workplace? If not, are there safe ECD centers in our neighborhoods? And all of this requires that every single one of us become a more active citizen, that voting isn't our only active interaction with the government, that we start to participate when and if we can. And thank goodness for Twitter. I mean, our finance minister is very, very active on there. I tweeted him all the time and he's yet to reply, but I think that's the person that makes the decisions that are going to affect the next generation's lives. Our current economic strategy doesn't even mention gender. It doesn't mention women. So there is absolutely no way that the president's plans for gender equality, which all sound very, very nice, I look forward to their actualization, but without our finance department towing the line, we're not going to see those changes. So becoming an active citizen, demanding that you get paid as well as your male counterpart is paid, demanding that we address the issue of childcare and the domestic labor burden, that we encourage boys to be good dads, good fathers, good partners in relationships, because this is a conversation between the whole of society. It's not a conversation between female victims and male perpetrators. The thing is, when we talk about victims, is it cultivates the silence. So telling me your story is one way to break the silence, absolutely. But we also need to stop talking about statistics of rape victims and not start talking about perpetrators. And who are we allowing to become perpetrators in society through policy inaction around prevention programs, through failure to have conversations at religious institutions? I mean, I could go on, but courage, I think, is central to it. And if you think of the word courage, it really comes from the French root of cœur, which is your heart. You have to do this work with your heart. And like Xoliswa was saying, when you need time for healing, you need to take that time and rest, because I see a lot of young feminist activists, and it was me, a decade ago. I was so angry about what I was seeing in the world. It was so unfair, and I threw my whole self in, and I didn't take that time to rest. And so my body made me. I got burnt out, and I had to take the rest because I had to. You can avoid that by being kind to yourself, by having the courage to rest and knowing that there's many feminists out there who are keeping fighting on that day when you're taking your rest day.
I think what you mentioned is a very real problem, and women's organizations and community-based and big NGOs and just ordinary women who fight against the rape and sexual violence, is that they do become burnt out so incredibly quickly, and it takes tremendous courage to be able to come forward and tell your story. I'm really sorry that Andy hasn't been able to join us, because she took the step not just only of writing her story, but taking on the justice system. And I think that, questioning the justice system, questioning the way the police behave, because as you say, we spend a lot of time speaking sometimes about victims, and we don't look at how we are making perpetrators, and how the perpetrators, are just ordinary men that walk amongst us. Xoliswa, do you think that there are any, we often ask, there's always we're looking to government to fix the problem, and, there's got to be a policy, there's got to be a change. You're looking for like a big answer to the solution of sexual violence and violence against women. Do you think that there's anything that could have changed in terms of policy or big systems that would have made life easier for you during the years that you endured such horrific abuse?
30 years, if you look at 30 years ago and you look at the present, at that time, reporting domestic violence to the police was a laughable matter. But we have moved. We really have moved, and where we are, whereby when you go and report, you have somebody who will be able to take up the matter. When I endured those beatings from Bongeni, people would say, go and report, but I never did, because I knew it was going to be a futile exercise. Besides that, because of the power he was wielding at that particular time, it would have been difficult for me because the police would have gone back to him to say, I've opened a case against him. Hence, I said to Fred, when we were chatting and doing the research, I said to him, what is key is for women to have a plan. Without a plan, moving out of your home or moving out of that dangerous situation doesn't help, because you might go back. You might move out for a week or so, but you might go back. So you need a long-term plan so that when you move out, you don't go back. Because if you do go back, you might come out in a coffin. So what is key is those policies are important, the reporting structures are important, but there is also a need to educate at family level. There's a really at family level whereby parents need to understand their roles, but at the same time, there has to be an understanding within families that roles are not cast in stone. Daddy doesn't have to be the one bringing the bacon. Let's all contribute to the household income. Let's all contribute to the household chores. Boys must be taught at an early age that they can wash dishes, they can cook, they can clean the house, so that everybody does their bit in the household. It is not shift or pushed to the women to do the house chores. So there's a need for both. Otherwise, if we don't, government can have all the beautiful policies in place, and if these are not implemented at household level, we'll continue to see the scourge. Thanks.
Thank you very much for that. Fred, when you were listening to the story, did you have any moments where you thought that there was something that you as a man could have done if you had encountered Xoliswa during her life during those 30 years? Is there something that you feel that you could have done which could have changed the situation? I think Fred might have left us. So I think I'm just speaking into the air at the moment. So Xoliswa, I'll ask you. You say about that we need to have policies implemented and not just written on paper, and to educate on a family level. By writing your book, I think that's one of the ways that we can educate and share your story with individual people. Do you see a future where perhaps books like yours are taught as part of the school curriculum? Would you like to see something like that happening, where people become more familiar with stories that they're not, something that they can't relate to?
It is important, especially at high school level, because that's the age where young ones are really impressionable. And then from high school, it can be taken to universities. We will see, because if you look at the story, it's a South African story. It's not just about abuse. It tells you how theater was made under really difficult times under apartheid. So there is in the book, you get the history of South African theater, you get a bit of history of the country itself, and then you get to the ugly, which is abuse. But it is not just about abuse. It's a book that is multifaceted. So there is a need for it to go to schools, and if it does, yeah, that would be a plus, because it would really educate the young ones around, and it would teach them about couch casting as well, because for me, that's a big one, to say, really bring your ace game, go and train properly, other than to think kids can cut corners, or the older ones, the directors and producers, can abuse you. Kids must be able, the young ones must be able to say no when that happens.
Thank you. I think you've highlighted an important point, that your story is not just about the abuse, and that you're not just a survivor. Because I think often when we hear individual women's stories, people are rolled out, and I think a lot of organizations are guilty of this, of wheeling somebody out and saying, look at this rape survivor, look at this domestic abuse survivor, and that's kind of like their role, and they're boxed into that, without realizing that that's one aspect of a woman's experience in life, and she can be that and so many other things. And I think it's when we reduce women to just being, victims. I often hear, you know, even when the press report on cases, you know, women are called somebody's wife or somebody's sister, or they're not given their own individual identity, and then perish the thought of them having an identity that's bigger than their relationship to a man. But you know, you're a theatre maker, you're a performer, you have a whole lot of aspects to your life. Do you worry that exposing and talking about your abuse will change how, you know, the people will reduce you to that in their eyes, or is it something that doesn't bother you?
You know what? I was I was quite worried when we started researching and writing and finding a publisher. But at some point, I said to myself, the story is refusing to die. That was a key thing. The story is refusing to die. 30 years later, it says, write me, write me, write me. Tell the story, break the silence. Because it is us who sits in senior positions or in senior positions. Or let me rephrase it. If some of us who sit in senior positions are able to shield, what about the younger ones or people who are in less fortunate circumstances? So for me, it was important to actually break the silence. And just to indicate to people that gender-based violence doesn't have class, by the way. It is not people who are living in cramped situations who get abused. It is all spectra of society. People living in Sentin, people living in very comfortable homes really get the brunt as well. So I just wanted as well to get that myth out of the window, to say it happens to the best of us. I was worried about the city at some point, really worried about the city, because our theaters fall under the city of Joburg. So at some point I go to a meeting, the mayor is there, and I'm thinking the book is out, who has read the book? The media, there's been a slight media frenzy. I get to a meeting and the mayor says, I'm on page 4 of your book. I almost fell off my chair, but it means he got a copy. He understands, he understands, and he understood the issues at that particular time, and it has not been an issue within the city. But I'm glad, you know what, the experience to write and get the voice out has been so cathartic. It's as if I got slightly sick last year. It was as if my body was just releasing and releasing and releasing, something that I've never, ever, ever, ever experienced. So I would really encourage other women to write their stories, no matter how difficult the story is. But key is really finding somebody to assist you in writing the story. Because I'm not a writer, hence I went to Fred and said, Fred, can you assist me in writing the story? And key to all of that, I really didn't want to write an angry book. I wanted to tell my story as it is. You take it up as a reader, whether I'm angry or not, but from where I was sitting, I was saying, I need to tell my story in the most almost neutral or objective or subjective, difficult one. But I didn't want an angry story. Like I keep saying, if I wrote it 5 years after my divorce, it would have been guns blazing, really guns blazing. But after 30 years, you mellow, you know what needs to be told, you know what you can pull back, because there's a lot that we pull back with Fred, because there were serious legal implications. So yeah, that is where we are.
Thank you very much, and thank you for that encouragement to women to write their story. And I know, Jen, on your platforms, both on the website and collating stories and editing books, that's something you've been very instrumental in, and is encouraging and giving people a gentle and sometimes not so gentle nudge to share their stories. And I think writing, for me, writing and reading are two of the most powerful activities we can do as human beings. And there is something, as you said, Xoliswa, incredibly cathartic about writing your story. And it doesn't have to be published. It's just the act of putting pen to paper and getting your feelings and your thoughts out there. Jen, how important is that process? And do you think that women should just jump into it and try and do it on their own? Or Can you speak a little bit about the support structures that maybe should be available to women when they go into that process of telling their story, however traumatic it might be?
For me, writing is a way to make sense. So I can't prescribe a way of going about things, but I think sitting down with yourself and writing about how you feel can be a very confronting experience. And it is important to do that by yourself first. I saw someone on Twitter say yesterday, a lot of people thinking about who they are. Why aren't they thinking about who they want to be? You know, they should have a growth mindset and whatever. And I think knowing who you are is really fundamentally important in a world that is going to tell you a lot of myths about yourself, particularly if you're a woman. So I would encourage people to write their stories for themselves first, because I think the publishing industry is small. If you want to get your story out there, you're going to have to flog it to a whole lot of places. If you're able to write a book, fantastic. But as Xoliswa says, it takes a year at least for most of us to write anything at all. So it is a big endeavor. One of the fantastic experiences that I've had is attending one of the Life Writing Collective's memoir workshops. So they're run in Cape Town at the moment by an NPO called the Life Writing Collective, led by Dawn Garish. They are normally about a 5-day long session where you go in the mornings and you write as part of a group. You don't have to read anything that you're not comfortable with reading, but that space of group commitment to the task and group safety net almost for telling your story of group support and love and encouragement is incredible. It's one of the best experiences I've ever had is in a writing group. And that Life Writing Collective does offer courses for free if you're unable to afford them. So the previous participants can sponsor new writers. So if you haven't seen the Life Writing Collective, and that's writing RIGHTING, so getting your life right again through writing, I would recommend it. But I think, you know, I've been incredibly lucky that people have trusted me to collate and to pull together their stories, and many, many more who submitted their stories and they just couldn't fit in the collections, not because of quality, just because of you can only fit so many in a book until it becomes dangerous to hold when you're reading in bed. And so I think it's incredibly I'm very lucky to have had the opportunity to read those, to provide kind and constructive feedback. And that is something, I suppose, if you're writing your story, that I would also encourage, is finding someone that you trust, that you know you can give a story to and they will read it. One of the most helpful things in my marriage has just been to say, you know, what type of listening are you asking me for? Are you asking me for comments here, or are you asking me for just an ear? And setting those boundaries when you're sharing a personal story can be very important as well. You know, I'm sending you this because I feel brave enough to send it to someone, and all I need for you to say is well done. And you say that up front so that the person knows, can be incredibly supportive. I must just say, though, that the writing community as a whole in South Africa is incredibly supportive. I feel so lucky to talk with other writers, to meet them, and we're lucky to be in festivals like this because people give you their time. If you write to someone that you respect and you say, I really respect your writing and I would really appreciate it if you'd take the time to read this story, you might have to ask first before sending the story. That would probably be another tip, but they probably will, and they'll probably give you their time and their feedback as well. So again, be brave, be courageous, and take care of yourself in the process are probably my tips for life, not just writing.
I think that's very sound advice, and also endorse your endorsement of Dawn Garish's and the Life Writing Collective. And after the talk, I will actually just put some links into it for people that are interested in exploring their own story, because I think it's, as you said, to do it in a safe space and where someone holds both your story and does it in a non-judgmental way is really important. The other thing that I think we'll make available after this talk is just some resources and places that people can contact, because I'm aware that a lot of the topics that we're covering in this hour are, can bring up quite painful and hurtful feelings and experiences for people. And if you are sitting in that space at the moment at home, if you're watching this, if you're with someone that you can talk to, or if you need an external person to speak to, those links will be available after the talk that you can share how you're feeling with at the moment. It doesn't look like Fred has come back. I'm just seeing, no, he hasn't come back. Xoliswa, when you were talking earlier and you said that, violence has no class distinction, I think that's often a myth that we fall into in South Africa, that it only happens in poor communities, or it happens in a community of a certain race or of a certain educational level. But as you said, and as we experience on a daily basis, is it doesn't matter what your education is, what your race is, what your class is, what your income is, what language you speak, what religion you are. Every single woman across all communities can be, subjected to violence. Did you find that telling your story was made more difficult because you were perceived as maybe being of someone that was more protected, and that it can't happen to her because she's, and you can fill in whatever those blanks are, either if people see you as a very public figure, they think that you've got it all together, because obviously when you're out in the world, people see that facade. They don't see what's happening to you and don't experience the pain that you go home to every night.
What I just need to bring into context is that this happened to me 30 years ago. And at that time, I was really young. It is, unfortunate that I got married at 19, got divorced at 29. At that particular time, Mbongeni was really famous, and other people could not see, because one, I was able to hide it properly. I was able to hide my bruises. As you can see, I'm slightly lighter, and he would box me. He would really, I would be his punching bag. And when that happened, I would run away and be at home with my parents. I would go to my parents' home and stay there for at least 2 weeks, just to hide, just to heal and hide the bruises. So looking back and looking at who I am at the moment, I'm able to separate the two, by the way, the older me and the younger me. I spoke to my doctor the other day, and he was saying you need to merge the two, because it's one person. But at that particular time, it really wasn't easy to raise the issues, and I was younger. But at this point in time, no one would touch me. And yes, class, religion, economic status, violence doesn't, it cross all boundaries. It is rough. It happens in most households. If people could do the research as to how many women have been battered, not physically only, because violence is pushing, it's shoving, it is pinching, because other men would actually pinch, it is pinching. And does it happen to women only? You indicated earlier, it is with boys as well. So it doesn't respect any class, any what do we call it? Any religion or social strata. I'm not sure if I answered the question correctly.
Yes, you did. Thank you very much. I think what you're highlighting is that nobody is immune to it. I think Fred is back with us. Thank you, Fred, for coming back.
Yes.
Can you hear us? Yes, you're there.
Yes, I can. Could I just come in there?
Yes. Please do.
There's the reality of the systemic reality of patriarchy, which comes into play in many of these instances of abuse in the home. It creates conditions where women can actually also be complicit in the abuse of fellow women through silence, either because they feel if they were to speak out, or they were to allow their daughter or their sister to speak out, their economic privilege, the financial resources would be shut off. A specific instance here is there's a chapter in the book, in Xoliswa's book, where she tells a story when she started speaking out about what Ngema was doing to girls within the company, committed artists, and she related stories to the parents or to the guardians of those children, and they said, "Do not topple the apple cart. because if you challenge Mongeni, he might just fire our kids. And these kids are on the brink of success. At that time, Sarafina was about to be taken over to America. And had Xoliswa spoken out in public, or either to the media or to the authorities, the parents of those kids feared that those kids would be kicked out of the production, and they would therefore lose out. So these women became complicit, not because they enjoyed seeing their kids being abused, but the priority here was economic or financial privilege. So they had to keep silent as a result. So it's all about power relations here coming into play.
Thank you for that contribution, Fred. And as you know, Jen was speaking earlier, there really is, it's the whole system, and it's, you know, women that are at an economic disadvantage, you know, they keep quiet because it may provide an economic opportunity. And I think especially with youngsters, and very talented youngsters in all kinds of fields, they've just released a report in the UK which has been investigating the abuse that occurred in football clubs over many, many decades, and the number of young boys that were subject to sexual violence and are only now coming forward and speaking out. And in similar circumstances, that in some instances their parents did know, but they were so desperate for their children to succeed and to, you know, to have a place on their football team, that they turned a blind eye. They knew what was going on, and they either pretended they didn't see it, or they didn't know what was going on. And I think the whole system, you know, of power imbalances props up that silence, and that's why telling stories, I think, is such an important way of breaking the silence. And the more we tell our stories, the more other people feel empowered and courageous to come forward and tell theirs. Xoliswa, when you Fred mentioned now about the other children that were in committed artists and young women, have you had any contact with any of them after you've released the book? Have any of them come forward and spoken to you?
Some of them have, especially those who are overseas. They called me, we've had long chats, and a lot of stories that I did not even know came out. 14-year-old, when they were 14, how Mbongeni tried to seduce them. Some were strong in repelling him or refusing him. Some succumbed to his push, because it was not a matter of him. He had a way of playing with the kids, giving them nicknames, really playing. And when you look at it today, it's about grooming. He was able to groom them to be the daddy, to be their friend, and then he would pounce. And some of the girls were telling me those stories, how he managed to get to so-and-so, how he managed to get to so-and-so. So it's been an interesting journey, just hearing those stories. It's sad at the same time, but some of them were brave to tell me. I mean, honestly, some you could tell that they were still hiding the full story.
I think that aspect of grooming, and the fact that the grooming happens in plain sight, and very often, you know, either with complicit of other family members or teachers, or if it's in an educational setting. And I'm wondering if there's signs that you could suggest, if somebody was either a teacher or a parent, or, you know, had a young person in their home. Are there things that you think they could watch out for, that could make them aware of what was going on? Or do you think that the perpetrators are so skilled at doing what they do that they can manage to get away undetected?
They're very skilled. Hence, I'm shaking my head. They come in different forms. Like I say, with his grooming, it was giving them the nicknames. And when you have kids who are coming from very poor families, and most of them didn't have fathers, so he became a father figure, and he was able to win them over. So when he transferred that love into sexual love, because initially it's pure love, you think it's pure love, and the same love is shared with a family. It's not just with a kid, it's shared with the families. and everybody believes and trusts that this is our guy and he has a wife. Remember, I'm there as the wife, but I'm the wife who's on the sides as well, because at some point I had to go to university. So we had a field day with the young ones. So it is really, really difficult to know and be able to see the traits of a perpetrator. Because they really come in different forms, and they are very, very conniving, really conniving. But it is up to the kids to know the touch, the good touch, the bad touch, as they teach them at school. And a 14-year-old and a 15-year-old, they know exactly what that touch means. But it is teaching for parents, it is really teaching the kids that you must be able to, this is a no-no. And no one can touch you there unless if you agree to it. So with perpetrators, yeah, they're skilled. They're very, very skilled. And with kids coming from poor families, even when that happens, it is difficult to go back to the parents and say, this has happened to me, because they know what is on their shoulders is to make sure that the family is taken care of. So at an early age, those young kids coming in at 14, at 15, they were carrying a heavy weight on their shoulders to say, you are going out, you will be the bread, you become the breadwinner, which was really, really unfortunate, but it happened. Yeah.
I think it is a lot to ask of a child, and I often think it would be a wonderful world if all the rapists and perpetrators could just have a label on their forehead so they could be easily recognizable. But as you say, unfortunately, they're not. And they're ordinary people. You know, we paint these pictures of rapists and abusers as being monsters and evil men in dark trench coats hiding behind bushes. And they're not. They're ordinary, you know, they're doctors, lawyers, politicians, teachers, art directors, artists, priests. You know, we find them in every single facet of community. There's a question from our social media feed, and someone has asked, why did you choose to keep the Ngema surname?
I indicated earlier that I got married quite young. Got married at 19, got divorced at 29. At that time, I had established myself as a Ngema. So it has been a difficult decision for me to at some point I did drop off Ngema and I became Nduneni, but no one knew who I was. So I needed to do Nduneni and then Ngema for people to know who I am. And then now that the book is out and I'm comfortable, people know me with a double barrel surname, I will be able to drop it off at some point. But I kept it because I've used it professionally for a long time. That's all.
I mean, I think it's such an interesting question to ask you, and it just reminds me again of how, you know, as a woman, even choosing your name has got a whole lot of power dynamics in it, because, you know, obviously when you get married, you're expected to take your husband's name, and if you don't, so if you do you right, if you don't, it's like you can never do it properly. You know, if you didn't keep his name, someone would be asking, why didn't you keep his name? So
but you know what?
Sometimes it feels like you're always on the losing side.
Exactly, and usually it's men who ask this question. It's been asked a few times, and I would always say, maybe if men took our surnames as well, they would understand the difficulty. At some point, just to give a bit of information, when I was trying to move from Ngema to Nduneni, I had my ID in Nduneni, I had my passport in Ngema because I had all my visas. So can you imagine the confusion when you have two completely different surnames? You travel, you're somebody else, you are in the country, you're somebody else. Hence, I decided to do the two. But yeah, I just wish men would go through what we go through. Maybe there'll be a better understanding of going to Home Affairs, of changing policies, of changing the passport, of changing everything and changing. Yeah, it has not been an easy journey, but one day I'll drop the Ngema. Thanks.
It seems like such a small thing in some ways, but I think it highlights perfectly the system. You know, that it's a woman that's it's expected to take a man's name. And again, it's that power dynamic coming into play, and it's a whole system. There's a whole home affairs, as you say, social services. You can't, thank goodness we passed the days where you had to get your husband's permission to open a bank account. But there are still, people that are married in a certain way that still have to get their husband's permission to access finance. So I think that, as much as, again, and I'll say, the individual stories are so important, but until we start looking at the system that entrenches everything from what you call yourself, from what you decide to sign your name as, even that has got implications of whether you have power in society or not, and whether you can tell your story and tell it with courage, and that you'll be listened to and believed. What you were saying earlier about the children that have been groomed and that weren't believed and that were forced into a situation which they weren't necessarily comfortable with, comes back to the economic power that you spoke about earlier, Jen. I think we're coming up to closing time, so I just want to ask you both. I'll start with you, Jen, for a closing comment around. So, if we're saying that telling your story is something that can break the silence around gender violence and violence against women, and that if we create safe spaces for women to tell their stories in, you spoke about the fact that writers as a community are very supportive, which I agree that they are, but I think telling your story doesn't have to be something that has to be published. Do you think that there are other platforms or other ways, back in I was going to say in the olden days, but that makes me sound really ancient, where we had things like speak outs, whether we reclaim the street marches? Because South Africans are very good at marching, and we're very good at standing outside Parliament and asking for things, but that doesn't seem to have made much of a difference in women's lives on a daily basis. Do you think there's some other way that we can tell our stories and be heard in a meaningful way?
I don't know whether the methods have changed that much since your olden days. I think it is still important to take up those public spaces when you get given the opportunity to tell your truth to people who feel safe to you. So I would start small and work outwards. I think a lot of people, with the pressure of social media to be, authentic and honest, tend to give a lot of themselves out onto social media, and that's sometimes very hard to take back. So my advice would really be to set your boundaries for yourself that work for you before you start telling your story at all. But there are professional organizations that are there to hear your story if you have experienced sexual violence or domestic violence. They're fantastic organizations like Rape Crisis, Cape Town Trust, who have resources on their website, and who have counseling lines and 24-hour lines. And if you're in the Western Cape, that have physical counseling for you to go to. There's also Mosaic, which focuses on domestic violence. And there's people working in the sector. So I think the number one thing to remember is it's not you that feels, you might feel mad, but I promise it's not you, it's the world. The purpose of the patriarchy is to make you feel small, like you're the only one this is happening to, that there's nowhere to turn. And that's just not true. So when you feel ready, there is someone who will be there to listen to your story. And there's many, many resources. I think we can share some after this as well.
Yeah, definitely. We'll put some links in after the talk. It will be on the YouTube and on the social media sites about the organizations that Jen has mentioned, which will offer counseling services, and also places like the Writing Collective that assist you in writing your story. Xoliswa, a final question for you. You're primarily you did charge of the theatres in Johannesburg at the moment. Are you seeing that there's an increase in women coming forward telling their stories on stage around issues of violence and that are pushing back against the patriarchy and pushing back against the kind of the age-old system of that, we always tend to hear as stories written by dead white men, that maybe that narrative is changing, and how important is it to do that?
There isn't much at the moment, and we are encouraging people to really come forward with good scripts, or it could be poetry, it could be a music event. For instance, currently tomorrow we're opening the play by Napo Mashiane, My Vagina Was Not Buried with Him. I'm really looking forward to the discussions tomorrow and the play itself. So it is just one of those that during COVID, so much has happened, and one has been hoping that writers and directors and actresses would really come out with these stories, but we really haven't seen much. But going back to the question that you posed to Jen, rewriting, key to writing really is there's a need for us with stories, because I can't call myself a writer. When you have a story, you need to write it down, raw as it is. Over the years, over the 30 years, I took notes. Each time I had a trigger, I would write something down. So by the time I got to Fred, I had pages and pages and notebooks, old, brown in color when they were white 30 years ago. So that when you have to write, you're not working from memory alone. You are able to go back to your notes over time. And then key really is for us as theaters and other venues to open up those conversations. But there is a need to talk and really to break the silence. Whether we break it via platforms that are artistic, or we protest as well as women. Because if you look at the ratio of women versus men, we are in the majority, and we are really not doing much in highlighting these issues. We should be marching. We should be telling our men that it is not okay to do this, but we haven't seen a lot of protest against gender-based violence.
I think one of the most powerful productions that was developed during lockdown, and it was staged before lockdown began and then converted into an online performance and is now actually being made into a film, was We Are Dying Here by Sipokazi Jonas. And I think it's one of those, an example of, you know, three women who got together and in the most heart-wrenching way told both individual stories but spoke to the bigger system of the patriarchy and around gender-based violence and sexual violence and violence against women in such a profound way. I personally have never experienced a production that touched me on that level with such authenticity and just almost like, you know, touched every fiber of your being, the way, you know, the lyrics, the vocal harmonies, the staging of it. And I think that it will be available soon as a film to people. And again, we'll share the link after it, because I think those are also ways that we can share the story. I'm not sure if you've seen the production, but it's really something that I'd encourage everyone to watch and share. Fred, are you still with us? Can we have some final words from you around, you know, we speak a lot about, obviously, in most instances, men are perpetrators. What words do you have for men in South Africa and more broader, you know, in the broader community around what is their role in fighting the scourge that we deal with every single day?
Yeah, it's there's this dynamic that we have a beautiful constitution that is forward-looking. We have great pieces of legislation that protect women and children and other vulnerable groups. But unfortunately, society is not marching in step with those legal provisions or with those legal frameworks. I do believe it's through forums such as books, theater, and people speaking out that these matters are brought to the fore, so that the narrative, the legal narrative that is there is matched by our daily actions. Otherwise, it's a beautiful constitution, beautiful laws that are meaningless in reality, which when they don't correspond with how society conducts its daily lives vis-a-vis the issues of gender-based violence.
sorry. Andy wasn't able to join us, but here she is virtually. And I'd encourage everyone to get her book. It's called Kwanele Enough, and details her experience, not just as an individual survivor, but the battle that she took when she took on the South African Police Service and the justice system. Equally, you know, I think to read stories like this where women really stand up and speak not just for themselves, but on behalf of all of us, are so vital and so important. And I'd just like to thank all my guests for joining me tonight. It's a really difficult topic, and I think it's something that, you know, it's something I've been speaking about for decades now, and each year the problem doesn't seem to be getting smaller, it doesn't seem to be going away. And I think it's only through conversations like this where we highlight the issues that we can maybe each day take a small action that can make us all feel safer, and that we can all live in a country where we can feel free. Because as Fred was saying, it's all very well having a constitution which is much admired around the world. But if it means that on a daily basis women live in fear and aren't able to live their best lives, whether that be at home, in their workplace, on the streets, you know, anywhere, then until we're all free, none of us are free. Thank you very much, and thank you again to the sponsors. There's still lots of opportunities to hear lots of panels over the next couple of days. The festival only finishes on Monday. And I encourage you to follow us on our Facebook, on Twitter, on Instagram and YouTube, and sign up for as many of the panel discussions as you can. And read the books. You know, words are such powerful things, and telling your story is such a powerful thing. You know, I heard a quote the other day about, you know, reading is breathing in and writing is breathing out. And if we can all take collective breaths in and out, tell our stories, share our stories, maybe we can go some way into fighting the scourge of violence against women. Thank you so much, Xoliswa. Thank you for your courage in sharing your story and for writing your book. Thank you, Fred, for listening to the story and for taking it down and being so meticulous in staying true to Xoliswa's sentiments and her pain, and also to her courage and what she's, you know, managed to come through and still share such amazing, you know, her talent with us. And thank you, Jen, for the work that you do in keeping feminism alive and thriving in South Africa and allowing women to tell their stories. Thank you, everybody, and good night.